the Nebraska Cornhuskers, they did something really interesting. They were like, we need to get some confidence for our quarterbacks. Let's rest a bunch of starting defensive players. Let's really juice the odds right here. Competitive game, a lot of highlights, and it wasn't just Dylan Raiola, who, by the way, threw a couple dimes. I mean, Rick Arberg got in there too. Y'all see Henrik Arberg throwing like 47, 50-yard dimes, like in competitive balls too. Tom, what were you able to glean? I don't know if you were watching sort of in that Saturday afternoon, portion of the day. They were kind of the only action on from a spring game perspective. But what have you been able to pick up from what happened at Nebraska?
I mean, there's kind of what you went over. The defense is missing a lot of names, a lot of guys who matter. And boy, did it look like that when you were watching the game, because a lot of guys running around open. It was I mean, I think if you're a Nebraska fan, that's whether intentional or not, you got what you wanted to see, because the quarterbacks looked good.
Yes.
Yeah. Like Raiola is the quote unquote, savior. He's going to be the guy to lead us back to the bowl game. But even like you said, Harburg looked good. And I remember watching Harburg a lot last year in games against, in actual battle, and he didn't look anything like the guy I saw in the spring game. So maybe he's taken a step forward in the offseason plan, or, maybe that defense is missing a lot of key players.
I thought that overall, Raiola looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
Relative to like what they ran out at quarterback last year. I have no doubts that he's going to have some freshman moments, but at this point, I think I've seen enough to expect that he will be the guy there. And I think Nebraska looks, and maybe I'll eat my words on this, but I think they look fairly justified not going into the portal quarterback market this spring. So they kind of trusted what they had in him. I think new quarterback coach Glenn Thomas probably doing a nice job there as well, helping him out. I thought he made relatively few like dumb freshman decisions, and that was impressive as in some ways as some of the big time throws that he made. I was out at Overtime Elite, the big 7-on thing, which is televised some of the games on NFL Network this weekend. I mean, you saw these guys making like crazy good throws, and it's also like, oh damn, like that's just a bad decision, right? And I thought Raiola had relatively few of those, so I was pretty impressed. I mean, pretty comfortable that team makes a bowl.
Oh yeah, I think our win total might be 7.5, so you might need a little bit more than just make a bowl. But
I know if I'm Nebraska, making a bowl will be plenty. Thank you.
There is undoubtedly an upgrade at the expectation for the quarterback position in Lincoln. That, I think that Arberg could start, but if he has improved, then they're going to get better play. I think this competition probably goes into fall camp, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And I also think, maybe it'll go into fall camp. Might be decided before that, but the competition will go into fall camp. I also think another thing that was interesting to me was because, I looked at that Nebraska team, and obviously the quarterbacks were a huge problem last year, but it's not like they had a ton of talent at receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a freshman kid that looked pretty, exciting in the spring game, Ja'Cory Barney, who had the 41-yard touchdown catch from Harburg, but he also had like a 78-yard kick return. So, I feel like Nebraska has had a lack of those kind of guys the last few years as well. So seeing him out there, again, just spring game defense, missing a lot of key guys, but you're looking for reasons to be optimistic. I thought that was one too.
Who is the 5th best team in the Big Ten?
Oh, okay.
Let's start with the top 4: Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. God.
See, I think it's for the taking. Nebraska is in that conversation. I don't think they're leading the conversation, but they're in the conversation to be a top 5 team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they are. Like if Raiola is everything we think he is, they can be. It's just if I'm Nebraska, my expectation, all I'm asking for is get to a bowl game. Anything after that, I would be I'm thrilled with. But if I get to a bowl game, I don't care about anything else. So it could be Nebraska, could be Wisconsin, could be Iowa. Hell, it could be Michigan State. Yeah, at USC, Michigan State, depending on how Childs goes. It's help. It's
how you feel about Maryland potentially?
Nah.
Kind of down.
Well, they did add Brian Ferentz over the weekend, so look out.
Iowa. Did we mention Iowa?
Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
You mentioned them there with Wisconsin, which is to say, if we were going into 2024 with the 2023 alignment of the Big Ten, then we would be like, hey, Dylan Raiola lit it up in the spring game. This is a team that could win the West. That's just not the world that we're living in the new expanded Big Ten, where it's going to be the top 2 teams. And like you mentioned, Bud, we can get to top 4 and draw a line. Now, can Nebraska be near the top of that line? Well, depends a lot to me on Wisconsin, Iowa, USC, Michigan State. But I think that in the best case scenario, they are ending up on top of the pile that will be the gluttonous middle of the Big Ten.
So one interesting team that we did not mention is Washington. And Washington, actually, if you use the Fitzgerald Spielberger chart, which is like a way of valuing like draft capital, like this is kind of like the chart that the smarter teams now use to like determine draft trades. Okay, I'll give you a first for however many, whatever. Washington was by far the best draft out of anybody. I mean, they were close to 10,000 draft points. Bama was second at like 8,800, then Michigan a little bit down, Texas right after them, then LSU and Georgia were tied, then FSU at 7,500, then a pretty big drop to like Penn State and Oregon. I mean, Washington just lost like so much high-end talent. And then the two of the guys that they didn't lose to the draft are starting center for Alabama and starting guard at Ole Miss. So it's really
but
it's kind of wild.
But J.J. McCarthy was just a caretaker on a great team.
Right.
Michael Penix carried that Washington offense.
But the reason that we didn't mention Washington is because we cannot. What can we carry over from last year, right? And there's no team in the Big Ten where there was going to be more drop off from last season to this season than Washington. I haven't double checked that, but off the top of my head, that sounds right.
Yeah,
10,000 draft points is nuts.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, think about like Cincinnati the year after they lose 9 guys to the NFL draft and then they go to the Big 12. Like they're not terrible all of a sudden, but they're not a team where you can look at and say that team is prepared to lose all that talent and just, maybe it's a game worse. Like, no, Washington's probably going to be like a 7-5 kind of team next year.
Mm-hmm. All right. What about, let's see, in the tailgate? Yeah. I mean, in the tailgate, there was a comment about Purdue. I mean, Purdue lost its best wide receiver and its best edge rusher and couldn't hang on to him.
It's a proof of concept. I'm going to need to see it.
Much closer to dead last in the Big Ten than they are to 5th, to me.
Yeah.
To start for sure. Yeah.
I will need to see it. I like that. I'm happy to be late. I'm happy to be late for the train for that one. Colorado and Oregon also, just shout out to the Pac-12 network. Just one last hurrah. I don't know where you get it. I've had 8 Pac-12 networks for years. I had so many different ways to watch. Anything stand out from those two? It looked. I did not like the discourse that starts with, look at this. First of all spring game attendance discourse is just so flat for me. I mean, just a wet sandwich conversation topic. But there was like, well, look at the spring game attendance last year and the spring game attendance this year. Well, I watched Colorado's spring game. That was miserable. It was like 40 degrees, driving rain. Like the fact that many people.
You didn't like the atmosphere, Chip?
Incredible.
Yeah, it was a good thing.
Yes.
Any football wise, anything stand out from those two?
Yeah, for Colorado, I think you can really take away that they're going to feature LaChauncey Wester a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a good player at FAU. FAU had who's the quarterback that they got from Texas who got hurt like immediately?
Casey Thompson.
Thompson.
So like obviously their quarterback situation last year at FAU was pretty limited. LaJonte got in there. They threw him the ball a bunch for like the first couple series, and then they yanked it. Like to me, that says he's going to be an impact guy for them. And maybe that allows Travis Hunter to play a little bit more defense. I don't know. They picked up a corner from Auburn that I thought definitely wasn't going to start at Auburn, but like would have been your rotational type guy. So maybe that allows Travis to play more offense. I don't know, but like the one thing I would take away is that Wester for sure is a guy to look at. I am really curious about this team and the tight end position. I know this is kind of nerdy on a Monday, but when I think Pat Shurmur, I think more NFL, more heavy sets, less spread it out like we have with Sean Lewis. Does Colorado have a tight end that you really want on the field? Because I think the optimal utilization and personnel here might be more 4 wide type stuff with a good pass protecting back, which we'll see if they have. But then you're kind of putting, if you run a lot of 4 wide, do you trust this O-line to go 4 wide? Like, I think they're clearly like 4 of their best 11 players on offense are receivers, and then Shador. Do they have a tight end who they can actually use, who people are going to care about and guard? I don't know.
I don't know.
I thought it was a good day for the Oregon quarterbacks, and I don't, not just Dylan Gabriel, Dante Moore, Austin Novosad got out there. It seemed all right. I mean, it's a pretty solid quarterback room that they have right there. I also thought that, defensively, I mean, Mateo Uyunglele's awesome.
Yeah.
They had to replace Brandon Dorless. They had to replace some defensive linemen. Looks like some of those additions are going to end up working out all right. Saw Kobe Savage transfer from Kansas State get a little banged up. There were a few other injuries that nothing. Dan Lanning said after the game, none of them were. I think his quote was "Football is football," and like none of them, seemed to be really, big. Trayshawn Holden also got a little bit nicked up, but I'm in. They answer a lot of questions whenever you're trying to figure out what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are going to be. Now they just got to go out and do it.
It feels like I have not watched the spring game yet, but just when I was going over some roster notes, it feels like a very high floor operation there. I don't know if they have a whole lot of like first rounders, but I think they have a whole lot of guys who are pretty good football players.
Right. And if you trust the coaching staff, then they'll be able to go and take care of business.
I think they'll be fine.
Speaking of injuries, Nebraska had a receiver and a DB go down, so we'll have to monitor that.
All right, we will definitely keep our eye on that.